Hello, welcome to this video series where I'm going to talk about how I made this Roubo Workbench. Well, hello again. This is part 3, which is where we will look at how to make the end cap fit to the rear section of the front top. This is the rear section here being marked out for the tenon shoulder. So I used my Festool track saw here to cut right onto the shoulder line. I did a practice cut first, as you can see here, to a different cut line on the wood. Takes a few goes to get through, and then you rotate the wood and do the section which is going to be lopped off. The blade doesn't go quite to the depth that you need on this Festool TS55, but that's okay. We've got a handsaw in there and a chisel and removed the remaining pieces. At this stage I'm just knocking out all the sides of the tenon, and then at the front left hand edge you'll see where the saw went through on its side, so that bit will be removed in a second. And that's the resulting tenon, which needs a bit of cleanup. And now I'm routing out the cavity for the tail vise screw, and this is cut out of the underside of the rear section of the front top. There's a piece of wood at the front against which the router fence is riding, and that's a sacrificial piece of wood which is just being used as a guide. And again, takes a little bit of time to chomp out all the wood. Eventually you get there and you have quite a large cavity to remove, because the tail vise screw is really quite big. For this operation I used a upcut spiral bit which leaves a nice clean cut, as you can see when you see the final cavity, and it's a very useful bit, simply because it's got a long reach as well. It's got nearly a 2-inch depth of cut. As you probably saw from the plans previously, the bench top thickness is about 102mm or 4 inches. So this router bit has to go down about half that distance, so about 50mm or 2 inches. And this requires a little bit of hand tool work afterwards just to clean it up. So now we've got the rear section of the front top fitted with a tenon and a large cavity for the tail vise screw. We can now turn our attention to this end cap, which is, in my bench at least, going to be in walnut. This huge piece of walnut I'm pushing through the planer now is intended mostly for the leg vise or chop, but a small piece off the end will be taken off for the end cap. So here I'm just squaring it up, face edge at the moment, and face side was done previously, so that should all be 90 degrees. And then after cutting off a piece, I'm now just doing the same again to the end cap piece, which you can see here. Here I'm just marking off the tenon of the rear section of the front top against the end cap, and then once that's marked off on the end cap, I can now route it out, or route the mortise out, which will hopefully fit the tenon perfectly. And once again, because it's quite a large piece of wood, it needs to be routed to a reasonable depth. This was a little bit precarious because the piece of wood was much smaller than the rear section of the front top, but I survived, and then I need to just clean it up with a chisel, and there was a little bit of toing and froing whilst I fitted it to the tenon. There you go. So here I'm just using the template provided by Benchcrafted, and as long as you position it correctly on your end cap, this allows you to mark off the holes required for the tail vise and the bolts which fix the end cap to the rear section of the front top. And there's a lot of holes to drill, as you will see here. This is the washer for the tail vise screw. So we do that counterbore first and then follow through with the required hole for the screw to fit through. I go almost all the way to the bottom and just leave the Forstner bit to poke through with its central spike, and then I can turn it over and pop it out, and you should get a perfect hole in it. Just hope the hole's in the right place. These are the holes for the bolts which hold the sort of, I don't know what the word is, the flange for the tail vise. Here I'm just cutting out some counterbores, some oval counterbores for the bolts which are knockdown fittings, and they use the barrel nuts which go through the bottom of the rear section of the front top. But these bolts and bolt heads will sit inside this oval shaped counterbore, so that when the rear section is allowed to move across the grain, and the bolts will shift with it. If you don't do this, then you could end up with a top which wants to pull away and break. So this is to allow for the wood movement in the rear section of the front top. These are the holes for the barrel nuts in the rear section of the front top. And here's just a quick fly over the tail vise when it's not inside the bench, and you can see the hand wheel there, and the flange, one of the bolts, or at least two of the bolts, and the main screw, which you can see is quite long, quite large. And then you've got these two long metal rails in which this dog carriage, I don't know what the right word is, but I call it a dog carriage. Basically you make a block of wood to sit on that L-shaped metal section, and your dog will go through the middle of it. But it's, when you first open this up and get it out of the box, it's It's a bit intriguing, it's very heavy, and you wonder if you're ever going to get it to work. But this is showing now the end cap bolted to the rear section of the front top, and without the slots for the metal sliders. They haven't been done at this point, but we'll come on to that later. So in the next episode we'll move on to the rest of the end cap joinery. Thanks for watching, and if you like what you see here and you're new to this channel, please subscribe for more updates as they come available. Otherwise you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter or Pinterest, so that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. See you again.